Tom, why don't we begin by you're bringing us up to date on developments in the area of book publishing.
Oh, great, Doug. This beginning of 2018 may be one of the better years to decide finally to write that book that we all have inside of us, particularly CEOs, association leaders, superintendents of schools, all have rich experiences which, otherwise would not have been easily shared under traditional publishing landscape. But things have changed so much today that all of us who have a book inside can really take the time and do the planning and get it done. It's not easy necessarily, but it is possible.
Great. Now tell us about that, Tom. What's changed?
Well, in years past, dreaming of being a published author was really a pipe dream in many cases because it took so much effort to reach out to either an editor, acquiring editor, acquisition editor, an agent who would introduce, first of all, get excited about the concept and introduce your idea to one of the 8 or 10 major publishing houses. Months would go by perhaps before you heard, and usually when you did hear, it was lukewarm or, sorry, your material is really not what we're interested in. And that became very discouraging. But today, with the introduction of digital printing and what is termed print on demand, it's possible for all of us who have a story to tell to decide to become our own self-publishers. That is, to actually create an imprint name and to sign up with one of the new digital platforms and take on the responsibility of organizing our book tasks, overseeing those tasks, and the end result is a book that is distributed on Amazon for sale, just like a traditional bestseller.
Well, let's get the nuts and bolts, if we can, Tom.
Sure.
Let's say I'm a superintendent of schools, or maybe head of a major transit system, or an association CEO, and I do think I've got a really great story to tell. I've got all this rich experience. What do I do? What kinds of alternatives do I have to choose from?
Well, as I said, you do not have to go and knock on the door of a Penguin or Simon & Schuster or Macmillan. Don't have to do that. You can if you want, and you may be lucky. But I would suggest if the book is inside and you want to get it done in 2018, there are 2 viable options. One is decide to become your own genuine self-published author through a do-it-yourself approach. And that's really what it means. Do it yourself. Take on all the tasks, learn about all the tasks, take them on, pay for them, nothing comes free, and see it through to the end. That's the do-it-yourself option. Now, there are companies that have recognized the need to help authors become self-publishers and have emerged as a second option. That is, a publishing services company. Whereby you sign a contract with that company for one or several publishing assistance packages under which they will provide services that will relieve you of having the do-it-yourself obligation, but it costs more money. And indeed, you have to be somewhat careful about the relationship that you enter into, because unfortunately some of these publishing services companies have not been as ethical as others and have preyed on the need of an individual person, manager, CEO who wants his book published at all costs and ends up paying exorbitant fees and seeing promises made never delivered. So I'm not saying that all publishing services companies are like that, but unfortunately the 2 bad apples have given.
Excuse me, but you're going to tell us later about how to get our money's worth, right?
Well, I'm going to suggest
how do we find the right company?
Yeah, I'm going to suggest what those in the field have said over the last few years about the caveat emptor part of this. buyer beware. So we'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute or so.
Well,
But anyway,
let's say I'm an association CEO, and I've decided to go ahead with a publishing services company, but I'm not sure exactly how to find the right one. How do I evaluate them? How do I decide which one's the right one for me?
Sure. Well, it's not unlike other service agreements that one would enter into, either through your own personal needs as a homeowner or as a consumer, or your professional role as a leader of an organization. I would say once you decide there's 10 or 12 organizations or publishing services companies out there that you want to look at, and you can find them through the web and through other Google searches, I would certainly narrow down the field and look at all the fine print that's available online before you send them your manuscript. Do not release your manuscript to them until you're sure who you're dealing with. So read all the fine print. Even I would hold back on contact information. Get everything you can, harvest everything you can from the web. Look at what their contracts say. If they say we're not sending you a contract without you sending us X, Y, and Z, I would go to the next company.
Okay.
But once you get that information, look at the costs. And most of these will offer packages, editorial packages, design packages, marketing packages, and try to determine, as you would in your own business or organization or nonprofit, whether these services appear to justify the costs involved. Other considerations are, can you get out of the contract? Can you exit? Can you move the book? Would you have access to your files if you decided to move the book? Who owns the book for the period of the contract? That's very critical. This is your work. I would be very careful about giving up those rights even for a period of time without some assurance that this company is going to deliver. So one thing I would recommend, Google the company name, followed by the word scam. And if they look clean, you're not going to see too many returns. The other suggestion I would make is it's a wonderful resource at the Independent Publishing magazine. You can go right online to that digital magazine, and they keep a scorecard of all of these companies. Very well-regarded organization, and I would definitely go to them before making any final decision to see how they rate the prospective partner that you choose. But again, the difference is they'll provide the services, they'll take all those tasks off your back. You want to be sure, though, that you're getting good value, they're going to deliver on the promises, and you retain ownership of your intellectual property.
Now, I assume you don't mind any of our listeners contacting you with any questions, since we're only going to be spending maybe 25, 30 minutes on this podcast.
Sure.
And
no,
so I don't forget, Tom. I don't want to forget. Why don't you right now give me your phone number and your email address, and so anyone who wants to follow up can do it directly.
Yeah, it's proeditor46@gmail.com. I'd be happy to respond to any inquiries. This is a vast river of information. I'm not talking about a stream anymore. It's the Mississippi of information that flows through the Internet on this topic. So
it could be overwhelming if you started looking.
Yeah, I mean, if you started looking on your own, you can go in any one of 200 directions, and I would be more than pleased, based upon painful experience at times, to maybe focus the prospective self-published author in the right direction. So, yeah, absolutely. Would love to hear from your listeners.
Give us that email address again.
Yeah, it's proeditor, one word, PROEDITOR 46, the numeral 46, @gmail.com.
Okay, great.
Give me a shout out.
Now, let's say I decide to go the DIY, the do-it-yourself route.
Right.
What kinds of things do I need to pay attention to? I've decided I don't want to contract with a publishing services company to take care of all these details. I'm going to just slog through it myself. So give us some tips.
Well, yeah. Again, this is a broad field, and it's like any other project that you might undertake. I'd say major project within your organization. It's going to require, and I break it down into 4 major categories. It's going to require, first of all, planning. And I advise all self-published authors, particularly first-timers, to sit down carefully, as you might do in your own project team at work or in your organization, and consider what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it. What's the purpose? What's the ultimate goal? And it's not always to make a passive income. It may be to build reputation. It may be to bring interest to your organization. But you're the one that has to sit down and decide what that ultimate goal is and what does success look like at the end of this project. So planning is very important. In planning, you really do need to start thinking about marketing right at the get-go, because believe it or not, there are millions of books out there, and hundreds of thousands coming each week and month, for that matter. And I'm including ebooks in this, although our discussion today, for this sense of clarity, is going to be about print books. Anyway, part of the planning, you need to think about also what makes your idea different, what makes your book different. Who's the customer that would normally be interested in this? And one of the things I recommend to authors is they sit down and they write at the very beginning the back cover copy of their book before they've even written the first chapter of their book.
Great idea.
Yeah, I mean, why not? I mean, you're talking about really thinking about the end first, the end result that you want. And like any good project, that's where I would start. Write that 4-paragraph blurb that you envision encapsulates what your book is about and why it's different, who it will appeal to. And part of that is going to be thinking about marketing. And I advise all of the authors right up front to think about who it is that you want to endorse this book right now, 6 months prior to its publication. Who is it, ideally, that you would want to gather a blurb or an endorsement from? You also need to think about a title, a working title. And there's a whole ream of information, all kinds of things on the Internet about building titles for non-fiction books and subtitles, which I don't want to spend a whole hour on that. So that pre-planning is number 1. Do that kind of work. Think with the end result that you want. Think about that first. Think about who's going to endorse it. How are you going to get the word out? Why is it different? Why should I buy it? Why should I?
Well, Tom,
yeah.
Should I consider a ghost author? Hiring someone to write it for me?
No, don't do that, because we started off saying you are now the gatekeeper. You have this wonderful opportunity to write that book inside of you. You always have an opportunity to tell someone. It's more difficult to tell someone to write that book inside of you. It's almost impossible. So
yeah,
unless you're doing a memoir and you can dictate things, that's a whole other avenue.
Okay.
If you're doing your memoir, possibly. But no, as a CEO, go for it. You know what you know how to answer these pre-planning questions. Why is it different? Why is it of interest? Who will be interested? How do I reach them?
Mm-hmm.
So go for it.
So planning is a key piece.
Planning is number 1. Then my favorite, editorial development and content. The words are no good. If there's a mistake every 500 words, if there's an embarrassing typo, that's a killer. Even if the book is wrapped in packaging that looks wonderful and your constituent stakeholders open enough and they see inconsistent styles, typographical errors, sloppiness, that's a killer. So I kind of came up through English and journalism, so editorial content in hiring an editor. Commit to hire a professional editor. It doesn't mean your brother-in-law, your neighbor, unless they're professional editors. It means searching for and finding a professional editor and paying a real pro. And you can find them online. There's a wonderful resource called the Editorial Freelancers Association.
Really?
Yeah, Editorial Freelancers Association.
Oh,
hey, this is the gig economy, and this is a wonderful time for us to tap into the gig economy. There are freelancers everywhere that may have come from traditional publishers who know the ins and outs, and there they are, bidding on your work.
Oh, that's great.
So I would definitely look at that and decide with that editor once you choose her what level of editing is most appropriate. You know, there's the content editing where she's really working on the flow and the content and the arc of the story, which may not be necessary. Then there's a line edit where she's working at the paragraph level to correct mistakes, to make the language flow, looking at syntax, spelling, punctuation. And then there's copy editing, which really is looking at the mechanics. So this is really critical. Don't gloss over it. Be willing to spend the 3 or 4 cents a word that it might cost to get the professional editing that you need. So that's number 2. Number 3, and I'll move through this quickly, is design. Once the words are great, you have a pre-plan on how you're going to market, to whom you're going to appeal. You need to design the book. The goal here, make it look indistinguishable from the #1 bestseller coming off, nonfiction bestseller at your local independent bookstore, coming off of Macmillan or Penguin or Simon & Schuster. The goal is to make it look, feel, touch, smell, look like, just like that book looks. That means it needs to have a good cover that is appropriate for your audience, your purpose.
Now, how important is the cover in your experience in terms of selling a book? I mean,
well, think about it. I mean, you go in, and those of us who still have a Barnes & Noble or an independent bookstore, you might gravitate over to the nonfiction, new nonfiction. And, in my case, and maybe yours too, I'm not sure I'm going in with a title in mind. I'm browsing. And I will pull the book down. I'll look at the cover, the title. I might look at the back blurb. But you have, a few seconds to grab me, really. Bookstore, maybe a few more seconds. Certainly on Amazon, you have only a few seconds. And, in fact, digitally, remember, you're looking at a cover that's like 1.5 by 2 inches, by the way, unlike the bookstore, physical bookstore, where you're looking at a 7 by 9 or 6 by 9 cover. So the covers have to work in both sizes. So, you have a few seconds to grab the prospect. Is this something I'm interested in? Does the title grab me? Am I going to turn it over and look at the back blurb? So it's very important, and it is worth you, the prospective author, finding a skilled book cover designer. Not all graphic designers will be skilled in that area. And again, I would go to the web to find these folks. 99 Designs is one source, and these are bidding sites where you get professionals bidding on work that you put up there. Biblio Crunch is another source of good creative talent. And lastly, Reedsy, R-E-E-D-S-Y. So everybody's gravitating towards the web to bid out these skills, which is good for us. So we've covered planning, we've covered a good, solid editorial product, we've covered a good, well-designed product that's indistinguishable from the big boys. Lastly is to find the printing platform and distribution platform. And there are multiple choices here, but the two really are CreateSpace, which is owned by Amazon, or Ingram Spark, which is owned by Ingram Books, one of the largest book distributors. And I could spend 3 hours on each of these, but the point of the matter is that these two services will allow you to upload, with your designer's help, your cover as one file and your interior as another file.
Okay.
And basically have the option of seeing a physical proof. Once they've approved your files, they say, okay, Doug, these files look good. Would you like to see a proof? Yes, I would. Okay. Definitely would.
You'll pay for that, I assume.
And I want to. You pay a few bucks, but you get in 5 days. You get a physical proof of your book, a one-off proof, and you don't want to skip that step.
Okay.
In fact, when I am helping the authors, I will insist they get the proof, and I will read the book again because it's very easy. Should you locate inside this proof an error, it's very easy to fix it by amending the file, sending it back, and fixing it that way, and even getting another proof if necessary. So the critical thing here, unlike years past, is that they can print one book at a reasonable price, one book only. Send it to you, you approve it, and once you do approve it, you're up on their site, you're on the Amazon site within a couple of days, and you are available for purchase. Now, I've compressed this quite a bit. There are a number of steps here, including setting your price. We didn't talk about royalties that are involved for a book that you sell, say, on Amazon. But you do need to set your price. You do need to build a book description. You need to be sure your files are in good shape. You need to order a proof. And once all that's done, you're up there.
Now, I might have missed something, so let's make sure our listeners understand. With both of these companies you've talked about, both of these programs, they are going to handle print on demand. Is that true? Someone orders the book. I mean, how do they get the book, the physical book? Let's say I want to order your book, Tom, on Amazon. I put the order in. I pay for it. What happens?
Right. Well, what happens then is you order it from the retailer. You pay the list price, whatever the author selects, say it's $14.99. You order it, say, from Amazon for discussion purposes. Amazon then produces that book. That's what print on demand means. They have demand for one copy because you just bought one copy.
And they'll ship
it. Amazon, of course, will ship it to the purchaser. Absolutely. The same in the case of Ingram Spark, they will have their retailer order the book. You will purchase the book from the retailer. The retailer orders the book from Ingram Spark, print on demand because there's one order, one book, and then the retailer is able to ship that book to the person that's ordering the book. So it's a very seamless kind of situation. And, it works out well for everybody concerned.
Great. Okay. So what else do we need to talk about before we include this tour of the publishing terrain?
Well, I guess in summary, I'd like to just suggest that there may be 4 or 5 things that you might want to think about in terms of planning up front so that your book does indeed is, first of all, well received by those in your community, and hopefully sells well. And obviously you want to write the best book you possibly can. And one of the things I know you're familiar with is right up front during that editorial process. Recruiting a number of people within your community, your target audience, who would act as readers of the early drafts, the beta readers, I would say, where you could get feedback from them while it's still in manuscript form. You can take that feedback, rewrite again, maybe recycle it again for another set of comments. So getting the beta readers involved to me is a critical factor if the book is going to be well received at the end of the line. I mentioned a professional editor. Couldn't stress that more. That needs to be part of your plan, proofreading and editing. Top-notch cover design we talked about, creating the marketing plan early, and there's so many ways to market the book. You can go online, you can spend hundreds of dollars in courses. In my opinion, getting those blurbs, those reviews early on is a critical step, and that takes quite a bit of work, both in researching who the opinion makers are in your field. And if there are bloggers out there, for example, who write and do podcasts, as we're doing this morning, get in the queue with them. Send them materials that will get them excited about the upcoming book. Offer to write guest blogs, be interviewed. Get them to write about your forthcoming book. And be prepared to send a lot of free copies out for reviewers. And you can actually pre-print, so what they call advanced reader copies, not in the final format, but in a pretty clean early format to send out for early reviews. So there's quite a bit of work involved here. The end result is, the goal is, your book should look very similar, if not exactly the same as the leading nonfiction bestseller coming off the press at Macmillan or Simon & Schuster. And lastly, write your next book. Start your next book.
I am positive many of our readers out there are seriously thinking about sharing their experience in a book. This has been great, Tom. I really appreciate your sharing what you've learned about taking a book from concept to reality, getting it well-designed, getting it marketed and sold. This has been a fascinating podcast. I want to thank you for taking the time, and I wish you a great day.